could be done
Rabbi
to find out if people
Cullen
would
something
be
a
interested
little
in any particular types of things.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I just think that but still, that means I'm having to buy books.
Well, maybe, maybe not. It might be
Right.
something where, um, I
The
mean,
other, the other thing
a
about it
lot
is,
of libraries,
yeah,
people will adopt a book
right.
that they buy and they don't.
The other thing about it, which is kind of interesting, is that the more overflowing our library is, the more inspired people are to bring their books. And the truth of the matter is I don't want it anymore. We don't
Yeah.
like we take them because I'm just trying to help another person. And generally speaking, I usually look through people's books and I find a couple that I think are worthy and valuable and I keep. But like most of them are like, I understand why you had this book, but we don't need another Jewish book. Why? We have right. And
You don't want my copy, huh?
Try to get
You don't want my
genealogy,
copy.
I guess. Every time grandma dies, you get all of her collection.
all the books.
And if she was up to speed, that means you're getting all these books that you've already got and have turned away the last 16 years.
Correct. And for that matter, all these books which are 60 years old and it's like
Yeah,
they've been reprinted 5 or 6 times.
yeah, and genuine new editions.
Right. So it's
Yeah,
a very complicated and the thing about it, which is the saddest, is that I love books. I mean, my own bookshelf. I have an overflowing bookshelf in my office, and I have to and I do a practice every year of getting rid of 10 books off of my shelf. Every year, if not more, 15, 10 to 20 books. I say, you know what? I don't look at this. I have to just say, I'm going to say I'm no longer. But that process of saying goodbye to a book for me is a very painful
yeah,
process. I love the books.
yeah.
I love them. And I'm sad. And but
But you get rid of them because of the room and space.
yeah, yeah. And it is but like I have it's like a little mini cottage that I do for my books. When I every year when I have my moment of 20 books that I say okay, I'm taking this off the shelf because and generally what happens, as you point out, is that they end up coming because I can't really say goodbye to them. I just say you're on your own. It's like my kid who leaves my house. I'm like, all right, you're finding your own apartment now.
Yeah.
You are no longer able to stay in my apartment, my house. But you're still my daughter.
Yeah.
Find your own apartment. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
And the books that you had when you were in rabbinical study, are you keeping those?
Those are gone.
Oh, those are gone.
Those are gone. I mean, there may be a couple that are still hanging around, but no, that's not true. There's a few which I know. Some of them are like extraordinary things, which it's like a resource for. I have like one which is like the definitive resource on liturgy and stuff like. It's like I'm keeping it. I've got a dictionary which was kind of like an important dictionary that I use, which I just still keep around, even though I haven't looked at it in. But the other part of it is, and this is true, and it happens inevitably. I get rid of a book, and the day I get rid of it, I'm like, you know what? I could really use that right now, and I really it drives me batty too.
Jim, what's the academic perspective on this? You came from being surrounded by books. Did you bring many with you?
About a quarter of the books that I have, and I probably they take the largest part of my apartment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you, when you got rid of 3/4,
Yes.
what was that? What did that feel like?
Well, some were my wife's books, and what did that feel like? Some of it was real loss, but I gave them to people
Right.
who wanted them.
Oh,
So
that's good to know. It's
they
either
were,
liberating
yeah.
because you finally make the decision to say, okay, I'm going to part from these books, or it's painful. The real.
But I kept a lot of the books that I studied with, which had some significant philosophical or political purpose.
Right.
Not the old ones, not old almanacs or things like that,
Right.
or area study, which
Mhm.
are dated. But yeah,
And the other thing is, I've got, for example, also, 15 years of journals, like the rabbi journals, right? And 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 these journals have really fascinating things that were written, okay, and
Like,
by rabbis, by academics,
I mean,
it's Jewish.
2,000 years from now, but not.
Well, no, that's the thing. So 20 years ago or 15 years ago, they wrote this. in kind of how we think about things. And so maybe they're a little off, or B, it's kind of inappropriate what they said, but C, like, but sometimes it's really just kind of worthy, interesting material. And I don't want to necessarily, and I feel, but I don't have these journals cataloged so well that I can just kind of say, oh, I should consult, ni- 2007 spring journal because it's going to have a great article about this.
Have those been digitized?
Maybe, I have no idea.
Well, if they are,
Yeah,
then that means they're keyword searchable or even subject searchable, depending on the database they're
I'm
in.
sure they've been digitized. The question is how easy it is for me to locate that.
Because
But
that often
Rabbi,
did.
this is
yeah,
Charles.
Charles, are you going to say
Your
something
voice,
that's going to ease my burden
your
right now?
voice is, your voice is a little fuzzy to us. I don't know what's why or
Hmm,
whatever.
let's see what I can do about that. I'll try my best.
Getting rid of the book is a kind of surrendering. You
I
finally
know.
realize
Echo,
I've never
job.
truly
All right, how about,
I've had so many. What
is
decade
this
is
better
this?
or
I'm
worse?
not going to read.
Well, I
Better.
Better. Yeah?
it was easier
Yeah.
to
Oh, wonderful.
when I realized
All right, now we're using this thing again. So let's get rid of this. All right, so let's begin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitanu b'tzav v'tzivanu l'asot b'divrei Torah. Praise you, Adonai our God, for commanding us to busy ourselves in the words of Torah. For those of you who did anyone not print out the little mini document that I sent to you today, here is your little mini document,
Oh, thank you.
one page, just a front and back. Not as much stuff on these guys, although there's actually a lot. I just kept it limited. I didn't want to overdo it. Yeah, of course. So, okay, but we're not looking at the mini document yet because we first have to look at um, Shimon Bar Yochai's Mishnah, and then hopefully you remember our conversation from last week about Shimon Bar Yochai. He was well, he's most notable for where we kind of what was most consequential was his emergence into the cave. Oh, and Tom, by the way, sent me. I've forgotten a lot of it, but sent me the Wikipedia article about Plato's metaphor, allegory of the cave. That was what I was trying to talk about. Plato's allegory of the cave, in which people are looking, they have their back to the entrance of the cave. They're looking at a wall and they see the reflections of people outside the cave onto the wall and their shadows, and that is their reality is shadows. Human being, that and is and it was Plato's treatise on what's real and what's not real, and that was what I was trying to remember last time about the wall. Anyway, about the cave. But back to this. Um, so Shimon Bar Yochai goes into a cave with his son. They come out of the cave, and you probably remember, and they become radicalized. And we talked about how you have these, you go into solitary confinement. We talked about it. You become a completely changed person. You are lost on a deserted island, and then discovered. What was the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks? You're changed dramatically after your experiences of such solitude. Even if you're there with your son, you still. It's like, so. What happened to them? They became radicalized in terms of Torah and in terms of how people should be focusing their time and attention. But so Shimon Bar Yochai, he is, though, as we also talked about, he though is held up in such high esteem by so many in the ultra Orthodox community. Well, because of his his zealousness towards study, but also because he is, as people say, the author of the mystical texts. I don't think that's true. In fact, I'm 99% certain it's not true. The Zohar, which is a Jewish text, was is attributed to Shimon Bar Yochai, but most people believe it to have been written by a fellow by the name of Moshe uh, Leon Moshe Ben uh, Moshe Leon, or is it Moshe Ben Leon? Moshe Ben Leon, and who was from Spain and wrote this 800 years later, but the Zohar. But it's a whole, if you, it, it has it becomes the holy text if you give it, if you attribute it to one of these early sages. If I write something really interesting, people are gonna like, it's not, it may sell 10 copies on Amazon, but if I say I found, if I write something but claim that I found it and it was written by Rabbi Akiva, then it's going to get far more purchases on Amazon. And so that's why I think it was Shimon. They credit Shimon Bar Yochai. Anyway, Shimon Bar Yochai said, this is Pirkei Avot 3:3. Shimon Bar Yochai said, if three have eaten at one table and have not spoken their words of Torah, it is as if they have eaten sacrifices offered to the dead. As it is said, for all tables are full of filthy vomit when the all present is absent. But if three have eaten at one table uh, and have spoken their words of Torah, it is as if they've eaten at the table of the all present. Blessed be he, as it is said. And he said unto me, this is the table before the Lord. So we have a lot of things which are interesting. Well, let me tell me. Uh, let's just start in a more open place. Anyone who thought about this Mishnah of Shimon Bar Yochai, three have eaten at a table and not spoken words of Torah. Anyway, yeah.
That's pretty harsh.
Yeah, it is harsh. So it's like what okay, so he's starting with basically saying idle talk is like vomit. Oh, how's the weather? Oh, what'd you do? Oh, wow, that's really nice earrings you're wearing right now. I, I mean, obviously, he says, and not spoken words of Torah, we can certainly like um, widen that and say maybe it's like when you just ignore the important conversations, choosing instead to focus on the meaningless small talk competitions, then it's like you're not taking seriously your places. Maybe that's kind of how you could
Should you only
modernize it.
speak words of Torah?
Well, they were saying that,
You,
and what you're saying is, what he's saying is that as long as you said a few words of Torah, then you're good. And what you're asking is, should your conversation be only about
right.
Torah? Now, Shimon would probably say yes, but I don't think that that's what. Maybe this is what he was saying.
Kind of identify that, but with the perspective, I know that one of the things I had learned as I was growing up in business was stop getting right to the point and start being human. And
So that's the opposite, though.
well, I was more like him,
Right.
he would say, and I found that it was much more productive and also much more enjoyable if I acknowledge that these are human beings and are interesting beyond whatever the topic of the day was.
Right.
But when I was younger, I was okay. We're going to decide this. What is everybody thinking? Where's your treatise on this? What we doing? Let's just get to it.
Right. Well, and
What was your name again?
right. No, right. No. And that's so you're bringing up the opposite, which I agree with, by the way.
I was much more productive, and also, and originally I went that direction quite consciously to try to get the productivity up and get everybody loosened up. But I found that I also enjoyed it more, so
Right.
it eventually became very natural to me.
So that's the irony is the opposite. I would argue that sometimes when I'm at meetings and that I hear people just yapping away, having really nothing to do with why we're there,
Yeah.
I am just
Yeah.
right. Come on,
Mhm.
let's. We don't need to be talking about how great your background, that what your Zoom background is, and isn't that funny? Oh, I really like how the whatever looks and the whatever looks. It's like it's okay. We get it. There's a background. So let's get to the point here. So it's interesting.
Even in these sessions, Rabbi, when's the last time we ever walked in the door and started talking about the PRK or
Right. That's true, because we start
we
talking
started
about
talking
stuff.
about something that's stuff.
Stuff. No, no. So there's and but as Bob points out, Shimon isn't saying that it has to be get straight to it.
Right.
Shimon's saying is that you can't have an interaction go with people and it just be idle, and it just be and not have grown, not have learned something, not have. I mean, again, I'm taking this mission and making it more relevant for us today, but have grown, right? And I think that we can understand what that means. Even if we're just talking about, if you read an interesting book lately, right? That's a subject that can help us grow. But if all it is, oh my God, you should have heard what this person said, right? Then it's just flat. There's no growth there. And I think that we or I can appreciate what at least the essence of what this conversation is based upon just, about, am I growing as a result of this, or am I actually taking a step backwards because I'm actually participating in this? Yeah.
This is called, in some ways called schmoozing. And my view is that the question is that this has to be a part of the conversation, but you have to move beyond that.
Right.
All of Plato's dialogues start out talking about some drinking or some kind of, and then they move on to a discussion of philosophical issues, the
Right.
soul and what is permanent.
Right.
And so, in terms of politics, for example, when people, let's say, get together and they, even on television, and they only talk about polls, who's ahead, who's ahead. I mean, that's absolutely trivial.
Right.
But if they get to the real issues of the nature of American politics, for example,
You're right. And any time, by the way, you do any public speaking, you can't just get straight to it. You start with an anecdote, you start with a joke, you start with a whatever. Like so, okay. So I don't think that. I mean, we can't. We're not talking about, like, as you were once, like, get straight to it. Okay, we have to decide about this, but rather there is something. But there is the flip side. If I were to give a sermon on a Friday night or a Yom Kippur, and all I did once, I did do this, by the way, which I basically went joke to joke, and I did a sermon on humor, on Jewish humor. But even then, I had a point, which was, let's talk about what humor means to the Jewish soul, and why we do this. But but short of that, if I were to kind of just give a bunch of trivial anecdotes, you would say, okay, that's great, but like, you're a little bit more, right? Because you want to grow.
But is Shimon saying get to some substantive matter, or is he saying there is only one substantive matter, and it's talk? And if you've talked about anything you think is substantive the whole night, everybody feels satisfied. If it wasn't Torah, it was like vodka.
Right. Well, yes. And now that's true. But then there's much more to this Mishnah, as you probably were looking at, that needs to be kind of addressed. And the translation here didn't do justice. And what I mean by that is because it actually gave away the pun, but because it gave away the pun, it didn't let you know there was an incredible pun that was going on here. In other words, it made the pun the real meaning. I'll explain to you what I mean. Okay, so it says, Shimon said that if three have eaten at one time. Wait, you need. Oh, I think I have another text, by the way. Fine. But, let's see if I can find it. Shimon said that three.
Rabbi, exactly where are we, please?
We're at Pirkei Avot 3:3. Here, I got one. Okay, so Shimon said, if three have eaten at one table and have not spoken their words of Torah, it is as if they had eaten sacrifices to the dead. And I'll hold off on the proof text. So let's start this way. Number one is that a person's dinner table took the place in rabbinic literature of the altar at the temple. When the temple was destroyed, the altar got transferred to individual dinner tables. So, for starters, they are referencing this they are saying it's like you've eaten sacrifices to the dead, because already the dinner table is the metaphoric place to be eating the sacrifices that were done in them. Now, the proof text that it uses, meaning the verse from the Bible that he uses to describe that, he says, as it is said, for all tables are full of filthy vomit when the all present is absent. The Hebrew said it from Isaiah, Kiko shulchanot, for all tables, mal'u ki, are filled with vomit, soa, filled with vomit, bli makom, and there's no room. Makom means room. In other words, what Isaiah is saying in his Isaiah text is he's saying is that the table is all vomit. And by the way, what's he referring to? He's referring to these parties and feasts that these idol worshippers would have, and that they would get drunk, and that there'd be vomit all over the table. And what Isaiah is saying is there'd be vomit all over the table. There wouldn't even be a vomitless spot at the table.
No room.
No room. So when it says bli makom, what Isaiah was saying was there's without a place of vomitless table. But the translation says all the tables are filled with vomit when the all present is absent. And the reason why is because in both biblical Hebrew and rabbinic Hebrew, another name for God is makom. In fact, maybe you've heard the expression hamakom yinachem, that God will give you comfort. That's what you say to a mourner. Hamakom yinachem. But makom, trying to think of other places when you might know makom being the word for God. I can't think of anything off my head. But point is, and so this translation gave away the pun, because what it should have said is all tables are full of filthy vomit and there's essentially no clean place at the table. But they gave, and then he later uses the word, and so, but if three have eaten at one table and have spoken their words of Torah, it is as if they had eaten at the table of the all present. And in the Hebrew it says, Va'amru alav divrei Torah, and if they spoke with each other words of Torah, ki'ilu achlu, as if they've eaten mishulchano shel makom baruchu. It's as if they've eaten from the table of makom baruch, the makom, blessed be. Now we know who we're talking about, right? So in the second time, it's obvious that makom is referring to God, but in the first use of the word makom, it's not referring to God. However, this translation said it was referring to God, right? And so what's great about this Mishnah is the use of a pun, not a pun, but rather the use of a word that has double meaning, and to use it doubly to kind of show that not only that when you are speaking words of Torah, that it's not just that you have that it's a conversation of substance, yes, but more importantly, you've brought God into the conversation, and you've brought God into your life. And that is, I can't remember if we talked about this last week or if I was just thinking that I was going to talk about it, which is possible either way. But it's Martin Buber. Did I mention Martin Buber last week?
You did.
I did. Martin Buber has his philosophy is called I thou. But the point is that, and what his point is that when you have conversations that are between two people and you don't see the other person as a means to an end, but rather as a person that there's back and forth with, he says this, his philosophy, though his theology, he says that is when God comes into your life. So he says that God is present through relationships between people. And it's kind of coming from this type of work, which is not about relationship, but rather they're talking about when two are relating on a meaningful level with Torah, that's when God comes into the conversation. Yeah.
I have a thing that's perplexing me when you discuss this. Before the destruction of the temple, sacrifices were performed in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
People went and brought they did the sacrifices there.
Yeah.
Does that mean they didn't do it at home? They didn't
Correct.
do Torah?
Only Jerusalem.
Only Jerusalem. And doesn't that mean that with the development of rabbinic Judaism, has gone much more into the souls of people than it did for the people living before the destruction of the temple?
I would say, yeah, for sure. Except I think though that I, the only thing I would say though is that if I could speak on behalf of sacrifice for a moment, and that is that I can only imagine that for um, the people bringing their animal that they knew was unblemished and perfect, and that they brought to that temple, and that they walked with that animal from wherever they were coming from all the way to Jerusalem. That was a very powerful and tangible feeling for them. And when the priest took their animal and sacrificed that animal on the altar, that these Jews, were probably feeling about as spiritual as I don't think any of them thought, oh, I don't even know why I'm doing this anymore. Like, whereas, like these days, it's I'm an atheist anyway. I don't even care. I'm here at the synagogue just for the social stuff, right? It's like, I don't think that thought crossed their minds. I think when they were bringing their sacrifice, they were about as certain as anything that that was bringing them closer to God. And in fact, the Hebrew word for sacrifice is called korban, and korban is the Hebrew of korban. The root of the word korban is kuf resh vet, excuse me, kuf resh vet, and that means to draw close. And so the purpose, and it was named a sacrifice, was because they believed that that sacrifice was bringing them closer to God. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the rabbis they went and did everything they could to to create a Judaism which enabled people to feel really close to it because they couldn't replicate kind of that intense feeling that a person had. But that was all they had when they sacrificed. Now they've got so much more that the rabbis kind of opened up for them.
So, really, would you say that the synagogue inherited the functions or the feelings or the observance of the temple or the heart in people's homes?
Synagogue have.
Synagogue.
Because, I mean, well, when you think about it, right, I mean, the biggest connection is pray 3 times a day, just like they sacrifice 3 times a day. So the Amidah prayer, the Tefillah prayer, is a full replacement for the sacrifice. And so now, granted, you don't have to come to the synagogue to pray. You can pray from any location. But what it wasn't meant was, oh, here are the 3 times that your house replicates the synagogue, or the sacrifice. Rather, they were creating kind of a worship schedule which replicated the sacrifice. So I would say the synagogue does, but what I would also point out though is that they do think that that a person's dinner table was the the stand-in for the altar. That kind of it's kind of I've seen it probably a half dozen times in various different places in rabbinic literature. So I think I can kind of go about the table, but that's about it.
Because I've wondered many times, if you're the services for Shabbat, how many people are observing Shabbat in their homes, from our synagogue, and I have no
I
idea what that is.
I
Uh,
Well, I mean, on that level, there's probably, who knows, could be a fair number of people, and people tell me, oh, we light Shabbat candles every single Friday. And so, and I certainly, just because they didn't come to service doesn't mean they're not observing Shabbat in their homes. So I would say you're probably right, but that happens. But I just, what I'm also saying is that might be what's happening, but that doesn't mean that that was how it was intended to be established that way. It just might be what is happening, if that makes sense. Yeah.
What's the significance of the number three? Why wouldn't you have two people
Right.
and have them talk to, like you
Right.
mentioned,
Well,
speak about
interestingly,
Torah?
we're going to see a couple missions later in which they're going to bring up that very point. They're going to say, well, 10, and then they're 5, 3, 2, and 1. And they're going to, and so, but I mean, I'll just point it out to you, and then 3, 6 has that very conversation in which they end up saying, no, 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 even one person, the divine presence is there, if one person is doing Torah. But so I don't know if why he said 3. It's a good question, and I don't know the answer. Why I don't have a good answer as to why he said 3, but what I can say is that they addressed that very topic
Okay.
later. Now, um, so I mean, it's by the way, this theme is gonna be somewhat consistent over the next handful of Mishnayot. This theme of when people are together and they're doing the right thing and the wrong thing. The next one maybe is the exception, but the theme stays the same. So that you will kind of see this repeat itself a few times. In fact, some editors of various compilations of Pirkei Avot, they they move away 3 and 4 and they push it a little bit later so they can do 6 and 7, I think, after 3, because it feels like it's all part of the same unit of conversation having to do with what, idle talk versus talk of substance. But and by the way, and that is, it's, these Mishnayot, these from Pirkei Avot, well, some of them don't really have any real relationship to us, like, but some of them can, and like this is a perfect example of, you know, it,
I think most of the ones we've said that
Yeah.
some relatives,
felt
yeah, some
football.
connection to. I mean, yeah, like this one for sure, though, because I can really sink my teeth into the notion of, small talk versus substantive talk. And in fact, it, if ever you have, if you have friends and you dinner or whatever, and all you did was just talk small talk about what's been going on, how the kids, how the whatever, it does. You feel like, okay, in the end, you felt like it was kind of an empty conversation. Not to say that it wasn't nice to be with the pretty people, but it's just to say, like, all right, I didn't really like I didn't walk out of this instance bigger or richer, not money, obviously, richer in humanity. I didn't learn about someone else. Something that someone else didn't share with me, vulnerabilities in which I was able to deepen a relationship with them. I just was just empty.
If I may say, my older daughter will be at dinner, and there'll be maybe guests and maybe not, but probably there are, and she'll say something like, "How about if we go around the table and each person say one thing they're grateful for?" Oh,
Right,
but actually, a great good comes from it because you really start talking about something.
right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Nothing much with a dinner with my daughter.
So let's talk about Rabbi Hanania ben Hafinai. And to do that, we need to go to our. We're not going to look at the Mishnah yet. We're going to rather look at our little source sheet, because Hanania ben Hafinai is one of our next stages. So again, we're on the source sheet that I sent out today. So we're going to read a we're going to read just one little story about Hanania, and it's in fact, we read a little bit of this already, and I'll explain to you why. Because we talked, I think it was when we talked, it was part of the Shimon Bar Yochai conversation, because Hanania ben Hachinai and Shimon Bar Yochai were like close friends, and they studied together. They weren't. one wasn't the teacher of the other. Rather, they were both the students of Akiva. And so the story goes, and by the way, this is from it's from Ketubot 62b, and I have to say this is one of my favorite pages of the Talmud because it's got about 3 or 4 different stories of rabbis studying and how it affected their family relationships. So there's one classic one about this guy named Rachumi who was just hanging around the yeshiva all day long, but he didn't even need to, and he did, and he ignored his family, and his wife was just so sad because she always was waiting for him to come, and he never came. It was a sad story, talked about Akiva, and talked about um, it talked about a rabbi who was gone for so long. I think his name was Hama. Talked about Rabbi Hama who's gone for so long that his son, uh, had become was just an infant when he went off, when their father went off, and he had come back, and his son was already a rabbi himself, having never really ever had any interaction with his own father, and he became a rabbi who actually was far superior to it. And it's like this sad story of just about how some of these rabbis ignored their families as a result. And this is yet another one. So Hanania ben Hachinai went to the study hall at the end of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai's wedding feast. So I think we read a little bit about this. It was just describing about how Shimon ben Yochai was a student of Akiva, and this was him. Shimon said to him, "Wait for me until I can come with you after my days of celebration are over." However, since he wanted to learn Torah, he did not wait, and he went and sat for 12 years in the study hall. That doesn't mean he sat for 12 years when Shimon wasn't there. Shimon came, a month later or a few weeks later, but he went and sat for 12 years in the study hall. And by the time he came back, all the paths of his city had changed, and he did not know how to go to his home. Like, that kind of makes sense. It's like I go, I go home to New Orleans, 3 or 4 times a year. And every single time I marvel about, oh my God, that's new. That's new. I haven't seen that yet. Wow, that's new. It's not that all these things are new since the last time I was there. It's new since I really remember being there. Or it's not about what's new, more about what I remember. Oh my God, the Chinese restaurants there that we used to go to. It's been 50 years. So, so what the Talmud's talking about here is that for this guy Hanania ben Hachinai, he's been away for so long that he doesn't even remember the way back home. All the paths, the roads look different to him. The houses that used to be there, which he's like, oh, I got to make a left-hand turn at the house with the blue shutters. They painted those shutters, and he doesn't know which one is the right house to make a turn.
You could see there being a figurative meaning to that too. If he gets to his house, the way to relate to people and how the house will run and all that without his being there.
Right. And he doesn't even know, it's not how to go to his home, but like, right, what's going on in the home and how the home functions anymore. And he's just a stranger to his own house. And you're right. There's another, by the way, there's another way to read this. Even though I know that this is meant to be read, that when it says he didn't know how to go to his own home, that it's meant to be read like the directions and where to turn and how to get there. But certainly when you read it, you can kind of see a little like he didn't even know how to approach his home after 13 years.
So, so Rabbi, this is all studying to the exclusion of other things in life.
Absolutely.
I guess, which is what the ultra orthodox in Israel.
Yeah, 100%. In
Is
fact,
that
by
how
the
it
way,
works?
the next one we may or may not get to it, but 3.5 really talks about it. But you're right.
So there's nothing in the Talmud that says, Torah is important
Torah with with a worldly job and making a living, and that there
Oh, is that
are,
right?
but there are also places that say this. And so what's interesting is, and and what that leads to is something which hopefully, at this point we've all kind of figured out, which is this notion of what's called the Shivim Panim LaTorah. Shivim means 70, Panim faces, LaTorah of the Torah. And what that means is that there are 70 interpretations of the Torah. So what it's saying is every time we say, oh, so I guess this means that it's saying that what you should do is study and not make a living. And then you read this one that says, no, 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 you're supposed to make a living and study, right? And this one says it's okay to leave, because Akiva was gone for so many years and didn't see his wife. Well, don't you want to be like Akiva? Well, no, there's other places that say, no, you have an obligation to be there with your family and with your. So you can't, there's no one way to say, this is what the Talmud says about this, because you can mine and pick for. There's, I've used for example, the political issue about the immigration, right? And I could make a Jewish argument, a very compelling and strong Jewish argument for both sides of the immigration discussion, right? I could tell you that we should be letting in every single person who comes to our border because, you should treat the stranger, and bring them into your camp because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So the Torah says. That's pretty clear. Let them in. And then I can also tell you this with the same, conviction that I know that one text that says, first you need to make sure that which is in your house is secure. Then you go into your community and make sure your community is secure. Then you go to the borders of your nation to make sure it is secure, and then after you concentrate on the world at large, right? So we have Jewish texts which say concentrate on you, then meaning I just and which one's more Jewish than the other? Neither. They're both the same, right? So it just goes to show like where you could. So I just caution anyone
So the good news
from ever saying this is what Judaism says about that, unless it is about as plainly, like idol worship.
Right.
All right, right. This is not the clear one. There's no two ways of looking at idol worship or Jesus. Okay, fine. But for the most part, I caution anyone into saying like this is what Judaism says about that, because you're going to find that there's going to be the opposite can be just as easily argued.
So the bad news from one perspective is it's not clear sometimes what our path is. The good news to me
Right.
is that it challenges your thinking.
Yes.
It can challenge your thinking and challenge you to develop your ethics, what we were talking about, develop your perspective, develop, and it challenges you to kind of be your own person. Where do I come down?
Yes, absolutely 100% yes. And I would say, though, that Judaism, I misspoke, because not about what you're saying, because certainly when it comes to when it comes to personal behavior, are you allowed to drive a car on Shabbat? No, no, it's clear. No. Are you allowed? Is this, what's the law about this? What's the law about that? But when it's more of like not a personal kind of my practice kind of a thing, but rather when it's a global value statement about Jewish values, that's when it becomes a little bit more complicated in terms of determining, what does Judaism say? Anytime there's a controversial debate about something, that's the thing I'm talking about, in which you can see it from two sides. It's only like when it comes to like, am I allowed to eat this on Passover? No, no, there's no two sides. Well, there could be two sides, Sephardic and Ashkenazic, but you get my point that there is a definitive law, and depending on where you live or who you identify with, the law how it applies. But the flip side, of course, to that is that, depending on the rabbi mines for the proof to the point that that rabbi wants to make. So if a rabbi is very liberal, then the rabbi is not going to be talking about the text which says make sure that your home is taken care of, defended, and then your neighborhood, and then your nation, and then the world. Rather, the rabbi who's ultra liberal is going to talk about, don't forget that you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So it's also about who's the one giving the sermon.
Christianity is the same way.
Right.
The New Testament has,
Various different things.
yeah,
Turn the other cheek. We, care about,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
So
your discussion made me think a little bit, and I understand my own limitations as far as knowledge, but my perception, at least of the ultra orthodox, is the rabbi will tell us the answer to everything,
yes,
all the rules.
yes,
If you're in reformed, it's like I'll have to think about it, but you're going to have to make the decision.
you're 100% correct. But that typically is about kind of personal law. Rabbi, what should I? Can I have cheeseburgers at my kid's bar mitzvah reception? All right, well, let me tell you about what the Jewish rules are. You're here to make your own decision. Whereas the Orthodox rabbis said, absolutely not. You can't have cheeseburgers at your bar mitzvah reception, right? So it's typically like that when it has to do with law interpretation. But things like immigration is not a Jewish law. It's how do we feel about this, and then Jewish values. How do we LGBTQ, abortion, you name the issue. How do we feel about these things? And then there's going to be an argument from both sides,
Well,
and there may very well be laws about it.
Even in the ultra orthodox, there will be views from both sides, or no,
No,
say,
no, they won't. But because but they can't deny the various different kind of arguments that could be made on the flip side. So let's continue with our story about Hananiah ben Hakinai, because it gets really sad, I think. I don't even know what it gets. Sad may be the word. Anyway, so he didn't know how to get to his home. So what does he do? He went and sat on the bank of the river, because he was basically saying, I'm going to wait for clues. I know it's around here somewhere. I can't remember what my house looks like, but I know it's around here somewhere. So I'm just going to hang around here until something, sparks my memory, or until I see someone who I remember and I can ask. Anyway, he went and sat on the bank of the river and heard people calling to a certain girl, daughter of Hakinai, daughter of Hakinai, right? So Hananiah ben Hakinai, that's, daughter of Hakinai is Hananiah ben Hakinai. So he knows that that's his daughter. Fill your pitcher and come up. He said, I can conclude from this that this is our daughter. Bravo. And this is our first example of a person in the Talmud who was on the spectrum. Because I can conclude from this that this is my daughter. Meaning his own daughter, whom he had not recognized after so many years, right? Because he probably left when she was 5 and now she's 18. Or she left when she was 3 and now she's 15, or 16 rather. He followed her to his house. So he now knows which is his house. His wife was sitting and sifting flour. She lifted her eyes up, saw him, recognized him, and her heart fluttered with agitation, and she passed away from emotional stress. She had a heart attack, right? She's like, what are you doing here? It's been 13 years. You're here now? Rabbi Hananiah said before God, Master of the universe, is this the reward of this poor woman? Like all that she did supporting our family while I was studying Torah. He pleaded for mercy for her, and she lived. Right? So it's a tragic tale. Obviously, it ends with her not dying, but I think that we still don't. I don't think anyone here is feeling like particularly good about the fact that he saved her from from death by praying. Instead, we're just kind of like saying, just shame on you for that she had a heart attack because she thought she had seen a ghost. Or, like she never thought she'd ever see you again. Now here you are. So Hanania is not like he's famous. He's famous rabbi. In fact, there is you may or may not know this, but during the high holidays, in a traditional Orthodox service of Yom Kippur, there is a, a service. And we have it in our prayer book, we just don't do it. Just because no one would come. Except for maybe you guys know that I think about it. In any event, it's the martyrology service in which it talks about the 10 rabbis who were killed by by Hadrian after the Bar Protocols. We read about Hanani ben Teradion and about how they wrapped them in Torah scroll and lit them on fire. Like, so we read about and Hananiah ben Hachina is one of them. In fact, his thing was that they that he was fasting. That supposedly he was regularly fasting, and that even on the day of his death, he was fasting, and he was trying to say a blessing for fasting, I think, and they killed him mid-sentence of the blessing, so he wasn't even able to say the blessing. And so, here's the guy fasting with, 2-3 times a week. Now we just call it intermittent fasting. But back then, it was, he was fasting in prayer 2 or 3 times a week. And so he was kind of also one of these, how do I put it? He was a little zealous, uh, uh, um, he had a degree of zealousness in terms of how he functioned with respect to Jewish tradition, Jewish
Is the murder of the 10 rabbis documented, or is it just in the doc?
It's in a midrash called Ele Ezkara, which is, you can find it. I mean, it's just like you can buy the book, or I remember seeing you can download it. It's ironically not on the Safaria page because and you'd say, how do I know that? Because I was actually looking for it today because I was remembering that piece and I wanted to just actually give you that source material also. But so it's in a midrash called Ele Ezkara, which is a slightly less ancient midrash, but still old. And yeah, but that's where you find the story of this. So
Thank you.
Hananiah ben Hachinai, now we're on 3-4, said, he said, one who wakes up at night or walks on the way alone and turns his heart to idle matters, behold, this man is mortally guilty. Like, that's it. Okay, so first, as Mark, you were saying, oh no, I think I was able to apply everything to this to mine. Well, so I just want you to know that if you apply everything, then you're going to apply this one, which is that you are mortally guilty if you wake up at night. And what happens if you wake up at night twice, unfortunately, which most of us these days are doing. There are urologists to help with that if needed. The wake up at night, walks on the way alone, and turns his heart to idle manners. Behold, this man is mortally guilty. So why don't we try to unpack this a little bit? What is this kind of talking about?
So if your mind drifts off when there's nobody around and nothing's going on and you've just been woken up from sleep and you're kind of going out to the loo and you kind of think, boy, it's chilly out. Then you're mortally guilty because you didn't think of Torah.
Right. So that's one possible way, and if that's the case, then oh my God, right? Because it takes enough of my ability just to make sure I don't trip over something when I go to the bathroom at both 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. or whatever. But the uh, how do I put this? It could be that. It could be that.
What does it mean to be mortally guilty?
Uh, Yeah, I've never really seen. I mean, that's the so the Hebrew mitchayev benafsho. He is guilty, in his soul, is what it's trying to say. And I don't really know. I've never heard this expression before. Never seen this expression or heard this expression. So I guess it's just kind of like a deep guilt is best way I can describe it. I don't know if it's mortally, but whatever that means. But it's, I think it's a deepness to the guilt. Now, I mean, you can also understand this a little differently. What would happen if you understood it this way? One who wakes up at night intentionally or walks on the way alone intentionally or turns his heart to idle matters intentionally, that man is mortally guilty. Like, I think maybe it's possible that what Hanania ben Hakina is talking about is, you know, those people who are up to no good, they are guilty at their core. They're evil at their core. The person who wakes up in the middle of the night because no one's watching and they do whatever they're going to do kind of in secret, the person who was walking kind of, surreptitiously, without having other people around them and kind of, in the alleyways, there these people are up to no good. Now, the idle matters, that one's a little bit harder to kind of to jive with it, but I kind of, at least at first, maybe read this from the perspective of he was just kind of referencing the types of people who are hooligans. You're a hooligan if you, but I don't know if the idle matters is enough to call someone a hooligan, but maybe the first two.
Is idle matters a decent translation?
Let's take a look. Um, so Rabbi Hanania ben Hachinai Omer, Rabbi Hanani said, Haneor Balayla, the one who wakes up at night, Vahamhalech Baderach Yechidi, and the one who walks alone or by himself, Vehampaneh Libo Levatala. If one turns his heart to things which are like uh, um, useless, useless matters. Harez de mitchayev nafsho. Behold, this person is
He doesn't specifically say evil.
nothing's evil.
It could be you got up in the middle of the night to go to a party, and you still said you're mortally wounded, right?
Guilty, right? So,
Guilty.
you mean if you wake up at night, or if you just late night partying and then come back walking home? It means that you're up to no good. Now, granted, that could be because you wasted your time, but I don't think though. I struggle with this. I'm not. I don't think I can give you the absolute answer. I don't really know it. Like I, I've read this as this is a description of the type of people who are no, up to no good. But idle matters. I don't really get that. But then again, it's turning his heart to idle matters, not turning his mind to idle matters.
That's stronger.
No, I know, right. It's stronger. That's why I'm thinking like maybe there is something to it that I haven't quite figured out. What is it about when your heart goes to idle matters? Like maybe when your heart goes numb, when you lose Okay, so how about the person who is, the person who is just, waking up in the middle of the night to kind of they're up to no good, as well as the person that you see that's just walking by themselves, kind of, it's a very in a curious or suspicious way, or the person who just when you interact with them, you realize that their heart's just kind of gone numb to kind of caring about other human beings. These people are those who are deeply guilty. Uh, this is target for me because I mean, if that interpretation is somewhat accurate, I then understand what he's saying, but I don't necessarily know if that's fair, right? It's like, let's assume that what I'm saying is correct, which I'm not necessarily. But just we're granting that, even if it's not necessarily the truth, then it still doesn't necessarily make this any more acceptable as a valuable. Or maybe he was just so out of touch, being that here was the same guy who couldn't remember how to get to his own house. All he was caring about was Torah for so long that he was just blind to the world around him, that this is the best that this guy could come up with.
Well, there's two questions I have. One is about any of the questions that you were asking. The other one is, don't I recall that you told me that these got into the printed Mishnah because
These are the
later
best.
later rabbis
Oh, I see.
went back and decided these are the worthwhile ones.
Yeah.
So their later rabbis
Has to be something to this, which we're not getting. Right?
Well, or just his reputation was so
or
big that they thought, well, whatever
That's
he
true.
said, maybe we
That's
should say,
true. He did have quite a reputation. Again, he was one of the 10
you
yeah,
martyrs, so that means something, right? Student of Akiva,
we don't
that means
understand it,
something,
but somebody will someday.
right?
Put it this
Although, yes, 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 but I feel as if this isn't meant to be a. We may not understand, but one of these days, Maimonides will understand it. I think this, we should be. I'm struggling, but it's not like a. And when I looked at some resources, so, for example, let's see what Olitsky has to say about this text. Here's what Olitsky says. Olitsky and Lenny Kravitz. Kravitz and Olitsky were teachers at Hebrew Union College. Not my teachers because they were in the New York campus. But so, okay, so these are the three notes. They talk about Rabbi Hanina, and they say sometimes called simply Hafinai. He lived in Eretz Israel in the middle of the 2nd century, and it was a distinguished disciple of Rabbi Akiva. He was martyred with him. We know that already. Number two, they talk about one who spends the night awake. Okay, so they translate it as one who spends the night awake, as opposed to wakes the night. Rashi and Bartonoro contend that the first clause specifically refers to one who spends the night hour thinking the wrong kinds of thoughts. And now they're talking about who goes on a journey alone. Bartonoro connects the last two clauses in the Mishnah. Since the night is a dangerous time, the lone traveler dare not distract his mind from Torah, which would be his only real defense against deadly accidents or hooligans. Right? It's like,
so that's if you're thinking about Torah God protection.
yeah. But boy, isn't this, I mean,
it seems in keeping with this thing about when you're sitting at the table with others, that sort of extreme, you got to be talking about Torah, or you're
right.
surrounded by stuff you don't want to be surrounded by. But
What you're saying is that it's consistent with
it's
the
consistent.
doing unnecessary things like walking around, doing your thing out alone, or waking up in the middle of the night, or staying up at night, partying. It's like
living superficially.
yeah,
Right.
that. But that I would argue was the last one. I don't know if it's this one. I mean, I hear you.
Yeah,
I'm struggling.
that attitude is just, it's like you said, okay, you've got a group of you, you're talking, and you'd better be talking Torah. And if you're by yourself in the middle of the night, you
Right.
better at least be thinking Torah. I mean, to me, it seems consistent.
Yeah, I do.
But
It does seem no, but we're all, by the way, I'm the same look that you're giving here is the same one that I'm feeling, which is I'm struggling here. I don't feel like there's any that I'm getting a real like for the first time I'm struggling with the value, and I'm not, and worse, and I say worse, meaning is that I'm struggling to understand how what he's saying contributes to that value. Like, is it really so bad? Like, is it okay? So the first one said, okay, don't when three sit together at the table and don't talk about Torah, it the God's not there with them. Fair enough. But are you mortally guilty if it doesn't happen? Or are you just not, you know, mortally praiseworthy when it does happen? Similarly, waking up at night, walking somewhere alone, it doesn't feel like I'm like not only am I not really understanding why you should be mortally guilty, but I'm also not getting I'm just not getting why these things are so bad.
How about, Rabbi, that are you spending all your time on your phone playing Wordle and spelling bee?
Yeah.
Or are you reading something
Well, that's
that's
the
connected to other people?
that's the previous one, and I'm agreeing
Well,
with
I
you.
agree
Do you
with
think
you.
that's this?
It's kind of similar.
Turns your heart toward idle matters. That's Wordle for sure. That's Wordle for sure. You know, but um, but is but I wouldn't call that person. But like, and I guess he feels comfortable calling that person mortally guilty. But I don't. I just don't see it as exceedingly praiseworthy, right? I see it as the absence of the positive, but not necessarily the negative. And he goes to the negative, if you're understanding what I'm saying, and that's where my struggle is. I'm getting the absence of the positive, but I just don't know about the negative. But
Yeah, the last phrase kind of throws me too, because I started to think of it as, well, if you get up in the middle of the night, not to go to the bathroom, but you're walking around the neighborhood by yourself in the middle of the night, and you're not thinking positive, substantive, about substantive types of things, you leave yourself open to all the no good stuff that goes on at night. Maybe you'll get dragged into a gang, or you'll get
yeah,
in the middle of crime.
yeah, I think that is what he was saying.
But you're mortally guilty.
Well, and that's what I said at the beginning, which I think what he's saying is these are the types of behaviors that hooligans would do, and therefore if you are a hooligan, you are mortally guilty. Now, but the problem, of course, is that yeah, it's true that these are the types of behaviors that hooligans might do, but that doesn't mean that if you do them, you're a hooligan. It just might mean that most hooligans do them, but not people who do them are hooligans, right? And so,
Making Venn diagrams.
right, right,
But you're turning your heart towards idle matters, which means you are behaving like a hooligan.
right.
I remember when my kids were teaching.
And
But it's saying
it says and
and like
turns your
and
heart.
as a result, turning your heart towards idle matters. So one who walked up night or walked on the way alone and turns its heart to idle matters. So the and part, well, let's take a look at the Hebrew. But I think if the English is correct, then that's interesting. Yeah. So, oh no, but because it could be or because it's the one who wakes up at night and the one who walks alone.
Mhm.
So it could be an and all. So the or that is here could also be an and. So right, so the transition can be one who wakes up at night and walks on the way alone and turns his
Right,
heart to idle matters.
right.
But even still, what your point though could be is that the first two lead to the third. One, it could be one and three. It could be two and three, or it could be both one, two, and three. But ultimately, always three. The third thing, the idle matters, is the one that's always a result of one of the first two. And so, and maybe, and if that's kind of what's happening, starting to become a little bit clearer, perhaps, saying that if you wake up in the middle of the night and therefore, and therefore are doing things that are turning your heart to idle things, then you are guilty.
But
If you
what if
are,
you wake up at night or walk alone and you're not turning your heart
well,
toward
right.
idle?
So, and perhaps
Because
what
that's
I
the
was hearing
idea.
from you, and
That,
what I thought was interesting, was that you have to read it as a and you do this,
right.
right? You
That's
can't,
what I. Yeah.
right? And even still, I guess then what it means is that we have to understand the your heart. to idle matter. It's heart to idle matters is the important piece here because you're not because it's not that your brain is doing it, but there's something that's changing you, and if you are changed as a result of it, you are more fulfilled.
I'm trying to figure out. I mean, I know there's guilt by association with the thugs who do stuff at night, but
Right.
it doesn't say you're out there doing anything other than turning your heart to idle matters.
Right.
Um, I'm thinking, what's different about daytime? Why? What's special about night then? So
Well, I think as night's like secretive and you are doing things more suspiciously, you're doing things kind of under the radar. I think.
well, but I don't know, but
This is
it doesn't actually say anything other than you're an insomniac and you're walking.
this one doesn't say make whatever its point is quite as easily as many of the other ones.
Right.
You know.
So again, well, so all right. So after all, two and a half chapters, we get one that's puzzling us. You're all welcome, by the way, to do a little bit of home research on your own. See if you can get anyone who can explain this better. Look on YouTube or something like that. Maybe some Orthodox rabbi gets up there and says, "Well, this means it's the evil inclination," and 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 you can.
So what are we doing next week for the semester finale?
We're having a big party here. No. Just one more. So semester finale, final exam next week. No, just a little bit more. A little bit
Is it
more.
a comprehensive exam or just starts the last
You're
day?
right.
Right. No. It's on chapters 1, 2, and 3, not just 3. Damn. So you got to look
See you
over
next
your
week.
notes. What's that?
See you next week.
It's great. See you,
I have
Charles.
a quick question,
Yeah.
and I don't know if it's a real quick question, but I think we went over it. What was going back to, that you've been away for 12 years? How is his family supporting themselves?
Well, that could be, first of all, it could be a son is doing work in the house or a daughter is doing work for them. It could be that the community is supporting while
Maybe
the,
his wife. She
what's
was the
that?
one who was just sifting flour. She was
Oh,
working
right.
for
It did say she was sifting flour.
Sometimes they did laundry.
Yeah.
Right. That's what Rachel, Akiva's
That's
wife
right.
did,
That's right.
was laundry.
Laundry.
I mean, so
Yeah.
they did jobs, but it wasn't, see, Tom, but it wasn't in any way like,
Wasn't that
it was terrible.
wasn't that being married to such a pious, holy man was a good status symbol? Why would any woman do that?
It was a status symbol. And not only was it a status symbol, but also there was the sense that because there was benefit. The benefit was that they thought that all the studying that was happening by their husbands was going to benefit them both in this world and in the world to come. So it wasn't that they didn't think they were going to get benefit from it, but they definitely suffered as a result of it, at least in the beginning. Um, but depending on the quality of the rabbi, in many cases, that they were also kind of like celebrities. Oh,
Yeah, it
you're
still
the
goes
wife of
on
Hafinai,
today.
who's been studying for 12 years.
It still goes on today because my cousin was saying, "Gee, I hope my granddaughter is going to marry a learner earner and not just a learner."
Right.
You know, so she would not have to
Oh
make
yeah. The
any
next one we read is going to be
waste.
very much about this notion of which is still very prevalent today in Israel
It's
about
very prevalent.
these ultra Orthodox Jews who go and they spend their life in the yeshiva and they don't do
Mhm.
anything. And it's like,
Yeah, my
and it's a
cousin
and
was
it's a political
thrilled.
issue in Israel because you know what else they don't do? Serve in the army, and that's a huge thing. It's not, although there's an irony to it because no one wants them to serve in the army. They just want to force them to do some sort of civic,
Right,
kind of job.
like a conscientious objector.
Right. It's like because no one wants this ultra orthodox guy, in the barracks with them, and and having to stop on their maneuvers every 15 minutes so they can pray. No one wants that. But it wouldn't be, but do a little community service, to kind of to contribute to the country just like everybody else is. That would be kind of nice, and that's what people are talking about, which is like have them do desk jobs, have them do, work in the, everyone's if people have to volunteer 3 years for the army, they need to volunteer 3 years for the country. But and so there's and right, but
And
They
the
don't
it's
feel that
not
way.
happening yet.
They don't feel
the
that way.
They're arguing about it, but it's not happening.
Orthodox say we're the only reason that your souls are going to be saved because
Correct. They
That's right.
say if we don't, who's going to pray for us? Right? That's what we need. Right? Because they really believe it. They're like, you need us to do all this praying and all this Torah stuff.
and
I
these
mean,
are the same ones that in the Holocaust was
some some believe, including the chief rabbi of the Sephardic community, who said what I consider to be the most hateful, distasteful thing I've ever heard in my life is when he was quoted as saying that the that the that it was Reform Judaism and the sins of Reform Judaism that caused God to punish the Jews
During the Holocaust.
and make the Holocaust.
Right.
Like, ugh, what an awful thing. I mean, that was Avadia Yosef. He's dead now, but what a terrible thing to say, right? That that we somehow made the Holocaust happen because of our sinning. It's so unacceptable that it's. Ugh, I don't know. Anyway, see you later, Charles. Nice to see you.
Speaking of the